What did you think of today's story? Do you believe in the power of standing up for yourself and challenging injustice? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from the US or somewhere else in the world? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow's special story. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. Turn on the notifications and join us again for another incredible journey. See you in the next video. She was wrongfully arrested, but the truth took down a judge. It was a quiet morning in downtown Chicago. Danielle Carter, a dedicated special agent with the United States Secret Service, stood before the courthouse, her heart racing. She was about to face one of the toughest challenges of her life, her own trial. But it wasn't just any trial. No, this was something far deeper, a battle that reached beyond personal grievances. It was a fight against the very system that allowed people in power to abuse their authority, the system that had wronged her and many others like her. Danielle had always been the picture of professionalism. In her crisp navy blue suit, with her black hair neatly pulled into a tight bun, she walked into the courtroom with an air of confidence. Little did she know, her calm demeanor would be tested in the most extraordinary way. As she entered, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. People took their seats, eagerly waiting for the trial to begin. The judge, a man named Richard Holloway, sat at the front of the room, tapping his fingers impatiently on the desk. Judge Holloway, an older man with silver hair and deep lines carved into his face, looked down at the case file in front of him. He had seen countless defendants come and go. To him, this was just another routine case. He wasn't interested in the details, at least, not yet. He looked down at Danielle, his gaze dismissive, sizing her up with an arrogance that was palpable. To him, she was just another woman who had found herself in trouble, a mere face in the crowd. But what Judge Holloway didn't realize was that this case would be different. This woman sitting before him wasn't just another defendant, she was someone who knew how to stand up for herself. As he sneered and mocked her, Danielle remained composed. Her expression didn't falter, and her voice remained steady. He might have thought he had the upper hand, but Danielle had something up her sleeve, something that would change everything. And with that, the game was on. The room was filled with anticipation as Judge Richard Holloway sat high on his bench, still looking down at the case file. His arrogance was palpable, and it seemed like nothing could shake him. He smirked at Danielle, convinced that this was going to be another routine case. His dismissive tone filled the courtroom as he mocked her before even hearing a word. "Another entitled individual who thinks the law doesn't apply to them," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. But Danielle wasn't fazed. Instead of cowering under the weight of his words, she sat tall, poised, and completely unshaken. She knew what he thought of her, she could see it in his eyes. He assumed she was just another person who had made a mistake. But Danielle had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let him win. When it was her turn to speak, she did so with a calm, unwavering voice. "Your Honor, I'd prefer to stick to facts rather than opinions." Her words cut through the air like a sharp blade. The room grew tense. Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow, momentarily taken aback. He had expected her to fumble, to plead, to beg for sympathy, but Danielle wasn't here for any of that. She wasn't here to beg for her freedom. She was here to expose the truth. She slowly reached into her blazer pocket, and everyone in the room stiffened, wondering what she was doing. The bailiff looked on with caution, unsure of what might happen next. But Danielle wasn't reaching for a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a small black leather case. The entire courtroom fell silent as she flipped it open. Inside was a golden badge, its letters unmistakable: United States Secret Service. The moment Danielle laid the badge on the table, everything changed. Judge Holloway's face drained of color. His smirk vanished. The prosecutor's eyes widened in disbelief. Danielle's calm voice shattered the silence as she revealed her identity. "My name is Special Agent Danielle Carter, United States Secret Service." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time in his career, Judge Holloway was caught completely off guard. The arrogance that had defined him for so many years melted away, replaced by panic. Danielle wasn't just a defendant, she was a force to be reckoned with, and in that moment, the balance of power in the courtroom had shifted. As the tension in the courtroom thickened, Judge Holloway was visibly struggling to regain control. His once confident demeanor had shattered, leaving only a shell of the man who had mocked Danielle moments ago. His grip on the desk tightened, his knuckles turning white as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Danielle's badge lay in front of him, a symbol of power and authority he had never anticipated. The prosecutor, still in shock, fumbled through his notes, desperately trying to find an explanation for the new information that had just surfaced. He had failed to see the bigger picture, and now it was too late. Danielle had set the stage, and there was no turning back. Her calm voice echoed through the room as she continued to expose the corrupt system that had tried to bring her down. "You see, Your Honor," Danielle said, her words sharp and deliberate, "the officers who arrested me didn't bother to check my credentials. They assumed I was guilty simply because of my appearance. The color of my skin made them believe I was doing something wrong." She paused, letting her words settle in the air. The room was silent, hanging on her every syllable. The prosecutor's face was a mixture of shock and regret. His eyes darted between the documents in front of him, trying to piece together how he had missed the critical details that Danielle had just revealed. He had been part of a system that failed to protect the rights of the innocent. And now, it was falling apart in front of him. Danielle's gaze never left Judge Holloway. She wasn't just speaking to him, she was speaking to everyone in the room. "Your Honor," she said, her voice unwavering, "this isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows abuse of power without consequence. You mocked me before hearing the evidence. You judged me without knowing the truth." The weight of her words crushed the air out of the room. It was as if everyone in the courtroom had collectively held their breath. Even the judge, who had been so sure of his authority, could no longer deny the truth she had laid bare. He was no longer the one in control. The power had shifted, and it was Danielle who now held it. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for sympathy," she continued, her tone steady but powerful. "I'm asking for justice. And that begins with holding the system accountable." Judge Holloway, his face pale and his pride broken, swallowed hard. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced with the cold realization that his career was on the line. Danielle's words were the death knell to the case he thought he had already won. The courtroom was still as death, with the air so thick that it seemed to press down on everyone inside. Danielle had delivered her final blow, and now, all eyes were on Judge Holloway. The room held its breath, waiting for him to respond. The weight of her words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating everyone present. His face had turned a shade paler, the confidence and superiority that had once defined him now nowhere to be seen. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. He had underestimated Danielle, and now he was paying the price. The prosecutor, visibly shaken, looked down at his papers, trying to piece together a defense, but there was nothing left to salvage. He could feel the eyes of the jury on him, their expressions full of disbelief and growing anger. They had been complicit in a system that allowed power to go unchecked, and now they were witness to its collapse. It was clear that the courtroom was no longer a place for justice, it had become a stage for truth, and Danielle was the one holding the spotlight. Judge Holloway cleared his throat, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. He couldn't look at her, couldn't look at anyone. Instead, he focused on the gavel in front of him, his hand shaking ever so slightly. He had no choice but to take a step back. The room waited for him to do what needed to be done, but the silence was agonizing. His pride was shattered, and he could feel the power he once held slipping away. Danielle stood tall, her composure never faltering. She had already won. The injustice she had faced, the mockery of her character, the prejudice, it was all now in the past. What mattered now was making sure this never happened to anyone else again. She looked at the judge, her eyes unwavering, her voice steady but piercing. "I don't need you to pity me, Your Honor," she said, her words like arrows that pierced the silence. "I need you to recognize that what you did was wrong. This is about accountability. This is about making sure that people like me, people who are treated unfairly because of their skin, have a fighting chance." It was clear. This was her moment of victory, but it was also the moment that would change the system. For Judge Holloway, there was no coming back. His actions would be known, and the consequences would follow him for the rest of his career. The courtroom may have fallen silent, but outside, the truth was already spreading like wildfire. The silence that followed Judge Holloway's verdict was deafening. Danielle's heart pounded in her chest as the reality of what had just happened settled in. The gavel slammed down, but the sound seemed distant, almost surreal. She had won, but the victory was bittersweet. The system that was supposed to protect people like her had failed, and today, she had exposed its ugly underbelly for all to see. The room began to stir, but Danielle didn't move. She stood frozen, her eyes locked on the judge, who looked as if he had aged 10 years in the span of a few minutes. The arrogance, the smirk that had once been so apparent, was now replaced by fear and regret. He knew the consequences of his actions would ripple far beyond this courtroom. His career, his reputation, it was all over. There was no undoing what had been done. The prosecutor, still reeling from the shock, stumbled over his words as he tried to gather his thoughts. He glanced at the jury, who sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the same disbelief that had consumed him. They had been part of a system that had failed, part of a charade that pretended to uphold justice. Now, it was clear to them that they had been complicit in a system of prejudice, and no amount of legal jargon would change that. Danielle knew this was just the beginning. The battle for justice didn't end here. She had set the stage for something far bigger than herself, something that could inspire change for generations to come. As she gathered her belongings and stood to leave, she felt a sense of purpose settle within her. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about making sure that no one else would face the same injustice she had. It was about exposing the truth, about holding people accountable, and making sure that the system worked for everyone, not just the privileged few. As she walked out of the courtroom, Danielle turned to face the crowd of reporters who had gathered outside. Their cameras clicked and flashed, eager to capture the moment. She didn't need to say anything. Her actions had spoken louder than words ever could. The world was watching, and Danielle had just become the voice of the voiceless. With one last glance at the courtroom doors, she whispered to herself, "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. What do you think about Danielle's incredible stand against injustice? Her bravery and poise in the courtroom have certainly left a mark on all of us, but we want to hear your thoughts. Was she right to stand up against the system that tried to break her, or should she have taken a different approach? What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Have you ever faced a moment in your life where you had to stand up for what's right, even when it seemed like the odds were against you? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your voice matters, and by sharing, we can continue this conversation and raise awareness about the injustices that exist in our world. And if this story inspired you, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss the next powerful story we have in store. Turn on the notifications so you can be the first to know when our next video drops. Together, let's continue to challenge the system and be the change we wish to see in the world. Drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from, and let's connect across the globe. Your thoughts, experiences, and reflections could inspire someone else, so don't hesitate to share. See you in the comments.